Black Business Council has called for the fast-tracking of the Public Procurement Bill, which aims at giving preference to historically disadvantaged groups in state tenders. Well, the call comes after the Constitutional Court ordered that regulations made to give preference to these groups when awarding tenders be scrapped. To talk to us more on this bill, we are joined by Black Business Council CEO, Mr. Kganki Matabane. Mr. Matabane, thank you so much for your time and for joining us on our program this afternoon. We're now seeing the scrapping, of course, by the Constitutional Court of the Procurement Policy Act. I imagine that this is exactly what you're menting or expecting to hear, is it?
Afternoon. The rule basically was against the powers of the minister to make the regulations. So it was not necessarily a ruling against Black Economic Empowerment necessarily. Because remember, we've got the Black Economic Empowerment Act, and then we've got this act called Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act of 2000. So in the act, then you have regulations. So ministers now and then they make regulations, but in this case, looks like the Minister of Finance made regulations without having the right to do that. But our issue is that the ruling has got no impact on Black Economic Empowerment, because the Black Economic Empowerment Act, and specifically the Section 10 of the Act, basically allows government departments and state-owned entities to develop their own preferential procurement policies, to determine their own criteria, qualification criteria, and to enter into partnerships. So in essence, the state-owned enterprises and government have not necessarily been doing their job in implementing broad-based economic empowerment. Maybe the minister got frustrated and decided to have try and introduce the regulations. But that is basically beside the point for us, because this act, which was put in place in 2000, 22 years later, it has not managed, I'm talking about the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act, it has not managed to empower Black people, it has not managed to empower women, it has not managed to empower youth and people living with disabilities. So hence we are saying this act actually needs to be repealed and then be replaced by the Public Procurement Act. And then hence we're also calling for the speedy, for the Public Procurement Bill to be speeded up, because the Minister of Finance released it in 2020, and the closing date for comment was end of June 2020. And then since then, nothing much has happened. We're now still in 2020.
Now, Mr. Bane, I think I wanted to look at the impact that this has had on the marginalized and the disadvantaged people in the country, and as far as their ability in joining the mainstream economy. What's your take on that?
Yes, the triple PFA has actually failed and has continued to basically promote the economic dynamics of pre-1994. If you look at the economy now, 28 years into democracy, and at the economy in 1994, it doesn't look this. It basically looks the same. The people who are leading the economy, more than 70% of the CEOs in the JSE are white males. The ownership of the economy is still less than 5% owned by Black people. The majority is still owned by white people. So the act, which was supposed to use state procurement to bring the marginalized groups into the mainstream economy, has actually failed. So there's a need for us to have a new act that will allow states and SOCs to set aside a certain percentage of the procurement by the state to empower the previously marginalized. And the Afrikaners did it extremely well when they were in power. They used the state resources, state procurement through public enterprises like Transnet to empower poor Afrikaners. And we have not done it properly because the act that was supposed to help us to do that has not basically facilitated that.
And if I'm understanding you correctly then, Mr. Matabane, you are calling for the overhaul of the entire act, but then perhaps then I want us to look at what sort of recourse needs to be taken in as far as empowering the disadvantaged groups to play at a much more level, plan.
I think that the issue is, for example, the president always, when he addresses the Women's Month functions, he always says 40%. I think he has said this for the past 2 years, saying that the government plans to set aside 40% of state procurement for women-owned enterprises. And then we've said this many times to him that will never happen. And it's mainly because South Africa is a constitutional democracy. Everything that you need to implement has to be, firstly, be law. So if, for example, you want to set aside a certain percentage for people living with disabilities, you can't do it until you have put that in the legislation. Otherwise, if you try to do it, you will find yourself in the Zondo Commission and other commissions. But also, you're going to be taken to court and you're going to lose because you will be implementing something that is outside the law. Hence, we are calling for the law to be overhauled and let's bring a new act that enables state employees who are in procurement to implement something that will change to the majority.
And just before I let you go, Mr. Matabane, what are then your options legally in as far as implementing these changes that you're calling for?
Yeah, we haven't gone to that because we had an engagement with the president 2 weeks ago, and the Minister of Finance has promised to speed up this process. So we're waiting for the minister this week when he tables the budget. We're expecting him to say something about the Public Procurement Bill.
Well, Mr. Matabane, we'll leave it over there for now, but thank you so much for your time and for joining us on our program this afternoon.